Would have been awesome. Would have been cool. But this is comes to the point where people are like, oh, well, oh, great. Now we're the baddies. Now Sylvanas is evil. Oh man, Garrosh 2.0. We're just setting up where she eventually we're gonna have to do this like whole stuff again and remove her. Like, oh, let's start thinking who's gonna be the next war chief. I was like, oh, maybe it's the old gods. Like, why can't we just? Which is another thing. Like, why can't we have a war without it being manipulated by someone? Like, I get that the first and second, well, really the first war was all about the Burning Legion controlling the orcs, and then I'm pretty sure the second war was like because there was a reprieve, and then like the orcs actually kicked the warlocks out, but then they keep going. And I'm pretty sure that was the second war. I could be wrong. Um, at least that happens in the second war, and then of course the third war is everyone fighting the Legion. And now I'm like, we're here in like the fourth war, and so we talk about like the burning of Darnassus, and like, oh well, it kills a bunch of civilians, kill a bunch of civilians. She's evil, like she's clearly just like Arth is. That's all that kind of stuff. And I think like the cinematic kind of refutes that the fact that you like because that night elf is accusing her of like, don't you see like you're just being. And everyone's like, yeah, they're just clearly making some kind of parallels here, and I'm like, well, no, I would say this is kind of the more the point that she's not the Sylvanas Windrunner you think she is, and you can't really accuse her of that because I mean we're talking about two different events, and so like the burning of Darnassus is a military strategy. So, and this is where we should talk about when you're attacking urban centers, when you're attacking population centers of the enemy, there's multiple things you're trying to accomplish. And so when we talk about urban centers, when we talk about cities,
Go forth to victory.
and so of course we have to talk about them in like this medieval setting, really. Even though I like to, of course, use a bunch of examples from World War II, and I think probably people at Blizzard would also, but when you're trying to apply modern moralities of war to which there really aren't any to a medieval setting in which or even technically we could really talk about it's really like Renaissance, like early modern, because I mean there are firearms and airships. Um, that really there isn't like rules of engagement, especially when we're talking about like siege warfare. And there's like a reason why you siege an enemy's capital is because well, it's the capital, it's the enemy's main base, and you want to get rid of it because it's the enemy's main base. And then, of course, there's multiple reasons for capturing a city because cities are these huge focal points in which allow you to control large portions of land. So by capturing a city, you thus capture large portions of land, and then you're just furthering your goals if you're doing expansionism. Which I mean, the Horde isn't necessarily trying to expand. They don't really want to capture Darnassus. Darnassus is this military base. They want to get rid of it because they don't want the Alliance to be using it. So, what an urban center, what the city provides is production. It's a centralized location where production can occur. And that's sort of the whole point of medieval cities. I mean, it's a place where people can gather, and it provides defense, it provides stability, because typically with cities you have governments. Governments form the cities, and cities typically have walls to defend from outside powers, and also cities at the central location allow you to do things like store grain. And I mean, it's just smart. I mean, there's a reasons why humans created cities. Um, but also so you have the centralized authority that allows you to produce things for war. Arms, like I said, food, because an army moves on its stomach, so you need a place where you can store, keep track of food, and also like stuff like medical supplies and I mean, basically everything you need for a war. you basically need a city. Now, I mean, you don't need a city. You can still do the things, but having one central location in which to do, keep, and manage that is like really important. And also, we talked about the fact that like the Night Elf Navy is based in Darnassus. I mean, it's like kind of this naval base too. Which again, how exactly do a bunch of fiery rocks set a tree that is sitting in the, like surrounded by ocean? How does that catch that on fire? Which of course then we have to argue like, well, exactly how does a tree survive in ocean water? Like, can trees really survive in salt water? Like, is there like a freshwater source somewhere? Like, how exactly is this tree like living? Like, shouldn't the salt water kill it? But again, things at the ocean are wet. How does a wet tree catch fire? I mean, you could argue, well, talking about like they have crazy like goblin stuff that with the run and blah blah blah. It's like it's a magic tree. It's a wet magic tree. How does just normal old ass flaming rocks catch it on fire? So it's important to take out this city because it's because of the ability to centralize production and also the military. Like, because where do all Night Elf players start? Outside Darnassus. Where do the Night Elf military pretty much train? Around Darnassus. And so it's kind of this centralizing thing. And so you get rid of that, and then it forces the Night Elves to scatter. And now they're living, I think, in a refugee camp outside of Stormwind or something. I don't really know. I didn't really play my Alliance character. He's 109, and I've never bothered to get him to 110, and then I didn't really. So, you get rid of that, and you force the Night Elf to scatter, and thus they can no longer give you a centralized thing. I mean, you can talk about how there's still going to be pockets of Night Elves on Kalimdor who are going to fight and resist and stuff like that, but they no longer have the support of Darnassus, which would have way more supplies. So now, like, okay, we have these bows and these arrows and these other Night Elf weapons, like swords and stuff like that, but we have no easy way to quickly replenish them. We have no easy way to quickly replenish our troops when they're depleted, and so now we have to be very careful with what we do and how we fight and all that kind of stuff. Because, like, getting resupplied, and this is where we also talk about, like, the French resistance in, like, France, and how they had to be very cautious, and sometimes they overextended themselves. And then there was I was recently there was this big battle that happened on this plateau in the south of France where the French resistance thought they were going to have huge Allied support, which actually didn't come. They got some OSI, I think an OSI commando team, and like this huge paradrop, which gave them tons of weapons and stuff like that. But they were expecting like Allied paratroopers to come in, and so like here we have a couple thousand French resistance fighters, and they were expecting like several thousand like American and British paratroopers that didn't come, and then here come like the Nazis with I think like 15 some thousand troops, mechanized paratroopers, and like also Alpine troops too, and then a lot of them were veterans of the Eastern Front, and they just came just rolling in and just rolled right over them. So when you don't have the supplies, you can't do the fighting. Which is, I think, kind of obvious. And then also, there's the whole morale factor. So this is, of course, where I bring up the fact that, and I made this point earlier on Reddit about how, so one of the, again, reasons is it's a centralizing thing, and it's also, in a lot of modern day stuff, we talk about this idea of human security. That and human security is this whole idea that, do you feel safe to go out to the market and shop. And this is one of the things that we kind of ran into in America when we talked about Afghanistan and Iraq. And we weren't really paying attention to this whole idea of human security. And that's kind of something you need to do when you're fighting an insurgency because. So, if you talk about Iraq, things didn't really get better for them when we toppled Saddam. Because then that's when, of course, a bunch of bad groups came in and like warlords and stuff and started taking power. And so when you have a bunch of people who like I need to go to the market and get food for myself and my children, but I'm scared I'm going to get blown up or shot. Things that, didn't happen before, but now is a huge threat. I'm not liable to like the people who caused that. And so this is where we talk about how certain actions have unintended consequences, like radicalizing populations. But the whole idea behind human security is by attacking your enemy's population centers, the population is then demoralized because they realize that their government can't defend them. And then if your government can't defend you, what good is that government and what good is this war? How about we just end this war so I can go back to not getting killed in a war? Except for, again, there's the unintended consequences. When you do that, it could completely backfire in your face. And then I gave the example of, like, the Blitz. So Germany, it was, I think, a response to something. Hitler decided, okay, let's go ahead and just like, bomb London and start attacking population centers and, try and break the British will. Except for, it didn't break the British will. If anything, it made them angrier. And of course, they were already fairly resolved, and you could talk about like how awesome Winston Churchill is, and also the fact that like the British government was kind of prepared for that, and you had shelters, so the British government could defend its people. Like, yeah, your house got blown up, but like you didn't get blown up, so in that extent, like, okay, the British government is doing their job, like, yay. Compared to when we like firebombed the crap out of both Germany and Japan, like Britain just like leveled stuff in Germany, and then we just leveled Japan. Like, I want to say like 98% of the Japanese population centers were incinerated. And then there's a lot of people like talking about, oh, you mean you're talking about the atomic bomb? Like, no, even before we dropped the atomic bomb, we had burnt. There was Kyoto was the only city not to be bombed, and that's actually because historians were like, "Hey, can you not bomb Kyoto? It's kind of really important." So, in Japan was basically like entirely made out of wood. I mean, we incinerated it. Of course, that didn't really work because I think we kind of misunderstood. I mean, they were kind of ready to give in because it was mostly the fact that Japan just did not have the resources or the industrial capacity left to really continue fighting. Of course, they never really had the industrial capacity to begin with. And then you're going to talk about like how big and huge the American economy is and how like as soon as we entered the war, like it was over.